Okay, so let's finish off purine biosynthesis, and then we'll work on the synthesis of the smaller ones, pyrimidine. That first big U is kind of one of the craziest things, so I think you got to learn that sort of separately. But once you know it, the rest of them become a little bit easier. So we start with, here we are. We've made our I. Okay. There's I. And what we need to do is we need to make, basically we need to substitute. Two things happen. To make adenine, think where we're going. We're trying to substitute this keto with this amine here. And really, we know these things resonate into here. There's a resonance form of I, that looks like this. Okay. When we discussed the structures of these things way back in the beginning, when you learn them, these things resonate back and forth. And just with oxygen, because oxygen's more electronegative, the resonance lies more in this direction, and only a small bit in that direction. Whereas with nitrogen, the resonance lies largely in this direction, and only a small bit in the other direction, because nitrogen is less electronegative. Okay? And this is, of course, always on our, ribose and our phosphate. And eventually, we're going to take this and we're going to make ATP down here. And the other thing we need to make is we need to make G. And, of course, you need to know what G is. And for G, what we need to do is we need to put a nitrogen down here and leave that oxygen alone up there. Okay? Leave that guy alone and add another position, and eventually, of course, we're going to get down to GTP, and eventually we're going to get down into, we need to make DGDP and DATP for nucleotides, okay? Somehow. So this step here, how am I going to affect this substitution? Well, basically, we're going to just replace that nitrogen. This oxygen with the nitrogen. We're going to take it, we're going to add D. We're going to get something. This is going to require energy. You add it, and of course, when we add D, we're going to release it as fumarate. Okay, so remember we started this in the urea cycle, we saw it again in purine biosynthesis, and we're getting it again here. D being used as a nitrogen donor is released as fumarate. Okay, it requires energy to couple it. And you could draw this intermediate, and in fact, you would have to draw this intermediate if you wanted to get all the points on the exam. And here I'm going to draw this resonance form that looks most like ATP, because now that this oxygen is replaced, it is, in fact, shifted in this form. You could draw the other isoform if you want. It will not be wrong, but it might be more difficult for you to remember. Okay, so down here, so that's A. It's actually quite easy. Use this D again. And if you go through the loop, use Q on the first side. The last nitrogen you added on the loop was a D. Now we're going to add another D and adenine here. Okay? Now, this thing, we have to substitute here. We have to put a substituent here. Okay? We have to do something at this bit. Leave this alone. That's fine. Okay? So what we're really going to do here, most textbooks are going to show, I'm going to show you an intermediate. Most textbooks are going to go all the way down and just show this thing. Okay, I'm going to make the two rings here. Put the nitrogen atoms in. I'm not going to put the substituents just yet. I'm going to show you what really happens is this is just an ene, right? And I can hydrate that ene. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hydrate it. H2O. And this is just so you can understand what. So I go through this type of intermediate. One of those types of things. You don't have to show, but you can if you want, and if you're confused. Okay, so that's just an addition of water to an unsaturation. And then, of course, what we're going to do is we're going to oxidize this alcohol to a ketone. There we go. This stayed the same. There. Okay, and when I oxidize something, that means I would, of course, right here, take those electrons out. So most of the time, you would probably just draw this. There we go, H2O. Okay, and we get some new base here. New base, we don't have to give it a name. I can call it base X. And in fact, it is base X. The name of this base is called xanthine. Okay, we don't really need to know it, but we'll know that a little bit later when we look into the degradation. We're going to see that again. So maybe Now we just have to replace that nitrogen, and in this case we're not going to use D. D goes this way, and there's going to be a reason that this is going to be D later on. There's going to be a pathway to integrate it with metabolism. All our pathways, we did ketone bodies, we did a bunch of things to integrate all our different pathways to what happens in an organism. We're going to have something called the purine nucleotide cycle to integrate this into the TCA cycle. Wow, isn't that cool? And so there's a reason for this to be D. Right now though, right here, we're just going to take Q to E. And of course that requires energy right here. Okay, there we go. Now you may think, oh, this guy, he's so careless. What he did is, probably in the exam he'd take off a mark. He didn't put anything here, he just do a red arrow. In fact, I was saving that as kind of a little surprise for the end. It's not really a surprise. So this is a balanced system in general for most organisms, including us. The ATGC ratio is about 50%, and so we need equal amounts of purines and pyrimidines, right? So I need to, not equal amount of purines, equal amounts of amino and keto. I need equal amounts of A and G to be produced. And so here is the other case. We've seen 3 cases where we're using G for energy, right? Remember TCA cycle, and we saw the gluconeogenesis, and now we're seeing this. G is being used right here, and that's because, look, we can balance this one. If we produce a lot of G, and G level's high, it's going to produce A. And if the A level's high, it's going to produce B. So it's sort of a balancing mechanism to balance the split of I. So when we have more G, it's going to produce more A and vice versa to keep things even. Okay, so that's just the tail end of this. Now let's just include pyrimidine biosynthesis, and this is much shorter. Pyrimidine biosynthesis, we're going to start with a nitrogen donor. We're going to have 2 nitrogen donors that we saw already, 2 auxiliary nitrogen donors, and maybe one more thing. Remember in the urea cycle, I'm going to put a little review of the urea cycle. So the nitrogen starts in an amino acid, right? And then it goes through E. Okay. Nitrogen, this is where the nitrogen comes, and not the full cycle. Then we're going to take this all out, and we're going to very briefly go through NH3, but we're going to get stored it up onto something called CPP, carbamoyl phosphate. Okay, and then the other nitrogen go to D, and then eventually these 2 are going to be collected, and they're going to end in urea. Okay, there. Okay. So these right now we're going to use these 2. Okay, carbamoyl phosphate and D, the 2 auxiliary nitrogen donors. Okay. All right, so we're going to start with D, and here, because we're doing the biosynthesis, we need to know the structure, because we're going to use D for the carbon to make the pyrimidine, okay? So here you can't use D just like this. You have to draw what D is, but that's okay. Everybody here knows their amino acids, especially the very easy ones, such as D. And then we're going to take carbamoyl phosphate, which we produce from ammonia and carbon dioxide just in here, and I'm just going to draw it right here. In fact, there's going to be a slightly different there, phosphate. Okay, this nitrogen going to displace this phosphate. Obviously, good nucleophile, good leaving group, and we're going to get this compound. As you can see, we're starting to already look like a pyrimidine. Okay, now this next step, and this doesn't require any energy. The energy in here was made from CO2, A, ammonia, and then another A, right? So the energy to form this was inherent in this phosphate, which was produced by this second ATP here. Here, we don't have to use any energy here because we're going to close this ring, and we're forming a 5-membered ring, just like a 6-membered ring, which is very favorable. 5 and 6-membered rings are favorable to form, and we saw that in the pyrimidine, in the purine biosynthesis, in that last step. Once we had that formol to create I, we didn't have to use any energy to form that last ring, right? And here too, we don't have to use any energy. Here, this is this nitrogen. We're essentially just forming this amide up top. There we go. Okay, so now what we need to do, we need to create the aromatic system. This is not aromatic, it's not a nucleotide. We need to put this double bond here. Many of you guys forgot the double bond sometimes when you draw your structures on the pyrimidines. We can do this resonance thing again. I can resonate both of these. Right? If I want to show the resonance structures here, I can draw this, and this is going to be a minor resonance form, but it is in fact a resonance form there. And so see, we have this double bond, and we don't have this double bond. So we need to create a benzene type structure, right? Then it'll be aromatic. Okay, that's what I need to do. And so I'm going to create this double bond right here. And this is going to be called orotic acid. There. And here I've drawn in the conventional form. Now, this is kind of like succinate. Okay, look what I got here. We have kind of an unactivated double bond. And we're going to try and create fumarate here. So this is going to require electrons kind of in the form of F. Now, this is not quite F here. This is something called FMN. FMN, which is like the top half of flavin, just the flavin part and not the rest of it. Okay. Okay. But I'll accept F there. Okay. And of course, as F does, it feeds into the Q into Q in the membrane. So some textbooks may just say Q, but that's really down the road. It really goes from FMN into Q. Okay. So it's an F type thing getting to orotic acid. Now we're going to take EREP, which we saw is produced from 5K1, our 2 energy equivalent to give here, just like the starting point. So this the purines are built right from the beginning on PRPP. Okay, pyridines are built first into orotic acid, and then we get OMP, orotate monophosphate here, and so we get. I'll draw the first one in full 5-O, just to emphasize what it is. There we go. Okay, nitrogen. And then what we do, a very interesting enzyme, what we have here. And the enzyme, there's a mechanism shown in your textbook. This is still controversial. People are not quite sure what to make of this. This is, in fact, one of the most efficient enzymes known. It has a rate enhancement of 10 to the 23, I believe. The best enzyme, and the efficiency of an enzyme is really how fast does a reaction go with the enzyme compared to the uncatalyzed reaction. So we know certain reactions proceed relatively well, like beta ketoacid decarboxylation, right? That proceeds no matter what. We saw non-enzymatic beta decarboxylation of, for instance, ItoAG in our bloodstream to acetone, right? It happens at some reasonable rate that we can easily detect and causes, certain physiological issues. But this reaction is so slow. It's it's very difficult even to measure its rate. It's so slow. Here, now I have UMP. Here, there, I'm going to just write RP now. UMP. So this is UMP right here. Give me my UMP. Not this blue. I use pink here. UMP. Okay. Now what we have to do, if I put the double bond, it'll be UMP. Now what we have to do, we take this, and it's going to be a Q to E. It's going to require energy. ATP, our normal source of energy. There's no balancing here because it's sequential. Right? We produce U first, and then we produce C. And there we go. We just get our C. There. CMP. There we go. Pyrimidine biosynthesis. Pretty straightforward. So these last two bits are very straightforward. I put the other ones in a separate video.